So, without further ado, Greg, who actually was waiting eagerly in the wings, is now ready for you. Craig Balding.
Thanks, John. Okay, welcome back. Hope you had a good coffee. You're going to need it. I've got the mandatory AI-generated image. I've tried to hold back on those. There's already many, many cliches in artificial intelligence. I do honor some of those in this talk, but if you came here just for AI cliches, I may disappoint, but we can talk afterwards. All right, so what's the agenda? 2 parts. The first bit is, assuming that you haven't been sort of reading lots about AI outside of the mainstream media, try to get people up to speed. I'm not an AI expert, but I've been studying it for a while now, and really I think everyone in security needs to understand this. Okay, so that's my starting position, and I've had a long life in cyber, and every time I take a step outside of cyber and learn about, okay, how do developers think? I'm not a developer, but okay, I can code, but or how do the salespeople think? How do the operational risk people think? And once you start getting into their side of the farm and start understanding things, then I think you become a better attacker and a better defender, right? So anyway, so the first bit, mostly theory, and then the second bit is just showing some examples of how, in your job, you might be able to use AI to assist you. Obviously, there's a lot of hype around AI. I think there's still a lot of rough edges. So I think there's things where people say, oh, it can do this, it can do that. And then I sit there and I type exactly the same thing and I get a different response. And I'm like, what? So this is fairly realistic. And also afterwards, if you want to chat, more than happy to. So that's background. I actually live up the road from here, so this is like the easiest conference to travel to. I literally catch the tram. What else is there to say? These days, I'm an independent consultant, and I'm interested in the applied side of AI security. Of course, there's some theory, but mostly I'm interested in the applied stuff. And I have to always speak to this question of what is artificial intelligence, because the person inside of me is saying, you mean machine learning? And of course, machine learning security has been around for many, many years. And for those of you that have worked with large data lakes and machine learning algorithms that put in a lot of data, you'll know that 80% of the job is finding the data, sourcing it, collecting it, cleaning it, and then the rest is actually the clever part, right? I see AI as a kind of broader topic. It's broader than pure machine learning, but the machine learning is really the science, if you like. And then just to mention, if you fall asleep, you can always subscribe to my threat prompt newsletter, which will be resuming after a nice long summer break. I basically share 5 security ideas every week, short, sweet, to the point. So if you want to stay up to date with AI security, that's how I'm doing it. I force myself to write the newsletter so I stay up to date. It's a clever tactic. All right. So what is AI? Okay, in a nutshell, it's a simulation of human intelligence. There are obviously levels and degrees of artificial intelligence. And the big question everyone wants to know is, when will we have artificial general intelligence? So when are we going to have a computer that can think like a human? And there's obviously many opinions, because these sorts of questions tend to lead to very opinion-based answers. But the one opinion that I kind of think is probably true is that it's gradual, and it's not like a binary 1 or 0, and it will have already happened by the time we realize it, okay? But no idea how long that's going to take. I do include some other people's ideas in this presentation on how long that is. But for now, I kind of feel like, well, if I understand my potential enemy, if AI becomes that maybe it helps me survive, 3 nanoseconds longer. Who knows? So, AI popular much? Yeah. So this slide is literally just to show how fast ChatGPT took off, how many users it amassed in such a short space of time, and it's fair to say that much like the Gartner hype curve, it's already, I think, on Twitter/X, it's already become a bit oh, AI, another AI thing. You know, it's already become, people are cynical about it already. So we're kind of moving through that hype cycle fairly quickly. But, you know, if you're not already using it, I definitely recommend you to have a try. Ethan writes a really good blog, definitely worth reading his material. And he just gives broad picture stuff, but it's really interesting. It's not boring. And I think the point he's making there is that, you know, AI is kind of growing all around us, even if not everybody has realized. And just on that point, I get asked by people, oh, how long will it be till AI replaces this job or that job? And really, I think if you're a plumber or an electrician, which I consider a valuable trade, as anyone that owns a house and needs one of those people knows, it's very hard to find them because they're very busy people. And also they can, depending on the country, they can also have a very good income. Those, I think, will be the hardest to replace. But people that work in an office, well, I think the writing's on the wall, and I don't know how long it is, but we will start, as we already are, some of us using AI to assist us, and gradually over a period of time, I think it will take over quite a few of the office-type tasks. So best to be one of the decision makers about how AI gets used rather than be impacted directly by it. That's always been my opinion on sort of technical revolutions. So why is there so much buzz about AI? Essentially, it's about performance. It's about being able to do things that, you know, previously when you write a script or a program, well, you know what that computer should be doing, even if it's not doing what you think you told it. But obviously with AI, we get new capabilities. And so these charts here relate to a test that was done in March of this year, which was a group of MIT researchers published a study where they asked 444 college-educated professionals to write realistic memos, strategy documents, and policies, and then half of them were randomly exposed to ChatGPT, and the time it took them to write these documents was decreased by 0.8 standard deviations. So in other words, they could complete the task 37% faster. And in addition, the average writing quality increased as well. So this is without any domain-specific training. This is just you know, it's state-of-the-art AI, but it's not domain-specific. It doesn't have any specific fine-tuning for those types of documents. Now, if you turn around and you say to anyone that runs a business, there are certain tasks where we can just give you an instant 37% reduction in cycle time. I mean, who's going to say, no, I don't want that, right? Obviously, you're going to look at it and go, okay, what's the pros, what's the cons, what do I need to watch out for? But when technology gives that kind of a reduction in human resource power, then you know it's going to be top of mind for senior business leaders who are making decisions about how they resource their company. So, what have we got? Code. So then the similar tests on code, right? So obviously anyone that's been using AI hands-on has probably used it within their editor. And it's pretty amazing having, you know, you write a comment which says, you know, function that does X, Y, Z, and you press your hotkey that invokes the AI text generator, code generator, and then all of a sudden the function appears that you didn't write, and there it is, right? And I think the first time you do that, you're kind of like, okay, that's interesting. And then you spend the next hour debugging it and realizing that every time you talk to ChatGPT, it's out of date with any library versions, especially with Python, and you might as well just use your brain instead. So figuring out how to use AI, you know, in your security life is half the battle, I think, understanding where it's strong and where it's not. Anyway, this paper, essentially when they had access to AI as a pair programmer, they completed the task 55% faster than the control group. Now, I think we can always question these things like, you know, it was probably in the interests of GitHub, who were promoting an AI product for the result to be very positive. But certainly I think it's true that within certain programming tasks, you do get a speed up. There's some things where it really sucks, and it's really like this doom loop that you go into where you just have to walk away after a while. and you sort of swearing at the AI under your breath. So the trick is to figure out when the doom loop starts and kind of jump out of that. That's been my experience on many late nights. Oops. And then we talked about text, talked about code. What about images? So this was the shortest prompt that I could give an AI. It was as you can see, it's a lipstick emoji, right? So that was the prompt, and then it generated this image of these 4 women. And what's interesting about that is if everybody laughed at your artwork at school, finally, you can actually generate things which kind of look okay. But the only scary part is just there's a bit too much red on the skin, like blood. And I'm like, where did that come from? I just asked lipstick, right? And so there's a slightly psychotic element to this. Anyway, what kind of services? You've probably heard of some of them. So Midjourney, DALL-E, ControlNet. ControlNet basically gives you better control over diffusion models. Because the big thing with AI is being able to steer it. Yeah, it's being able to control it. Because you write a prompt, and then it gives you something. And this process is very iterative because 2 reasons. One, there is a certain amount of practice around writing good prompts, which is the instruction that tells the AI what you want it to do in the case of generative AI. And then the other one is that they change the AI, right? So if you're using a hosted third-party AI service, then that is going to give you different results on day 1 versus day 10 versus day 20, even though you're using the same model. So one of the issues is like reproducibility. And from a security point of view, if we think about making control decisions with AI, well, that's not great news, right? Because we want a reproducible result given a certain set of conditions. So I think there's still some way to go before making a decision purely based on AI. And if you think about a lot of fraud systems today, where they will risk score, it could be an application for credit, it could be a transaction, and they're risk scoring various parameters based on the device, the user behavior, etc., what they know about the user. Then you can imagine that, as has already happened, where machine learning is already part of decision making for these things, you can also imagine that AI is increasingly going to be more of a decision maker. But then you hit the whole challenge around transparency and being able to explain to somebody, oh, we declined your credit because the AI said no. Well, that's not acceptable. And for example, the EU has already written that, yeah, that's definitely not going to be acceptable. You're going to need to be able to explain decisions. Well, how can you explain the decisions of a black box that generates tokens based on its training data? It's quite hard to do that. So I think there's plenty of research opportunities there. For the security teams, though, if you can generate images like this, you have no more excuses for really cheesy security awareness posters. So if you take one thing away from this talk, just rip down your security awareness posters in your company and go and generate some cool ones with AI. But don't ask it to write any words, because as you might have seen, if you try to generate artwork that has words, yeah, it's kind of dyslexic. I tried to even do like my opening slide. I thought, okay, let's see if it can do it now, threat prompt. And it was stumbling over even that, even when I spelt the letters out. And some people managed to do it, but you have to wrangle the prompt to such an extreme degree where basically you do what they call prompt stuffing. You make your prompt so full of text of what you want it to do that you kind of overwhelm, you bias what the AI returns. Anyway, for the bad guys though, phishing visuals, fake videos, deep fakes, I think you guys are aware of these things, but spotting them is going to become much more of a challenge. And so I think if any of you are interested in forensics, authenticity, then I think you start getting into an interesting field where, we've been able to spot AI-generated content reasonably well, but that's a real cat and mouse game that's going very quickly. And there are also a lot of claims being made, and again, you have to test the claims. Like, the reality is, if you test every idea you get told, about half of them don't work, right? And so this is the thing I've found with doing this stuff, it's the difference between what people claim and what actually is real when you test it yourself. So never trust any of the claims directly. Always trust but verify as a good security person. I'm not going to talk through this one because I want to skip on to the more interesting parts, but if any of you are old enough, I'm not, rarely I can say that, to have used ELIZA from 1964 to 1966, there is actually a JavaScript implementation. If you Google for ELIZA, you can have a little chat with this. It sort of feels like ELIZA's taken mushrooms or something. But it's kind of cool because you're like, wow, that was how many years ago? And, you know, it's not just totally predictable what it's going to say. So what's the timeline for generative AI? Treat this slide as like a piece of toilet paper, right? Anytime anyone stands up and says, you know, this is what the future holds, you just have to kind of boo them off the stage, right? But I give you this because this is, you know, according to smart people, in quotes, what's going to happen. And I think, obviously, what's interesting for us is like now and next, in the good sense of Hacktivity. And I think that if you look at the number of research papers coming out on AI security, look at the number of GitHub repositories that are trying to do prompt injection and other attacks on AI. There's a ton, and it's worth staying on top of it just because it gives you, again, another reality sense of, okay, how good and how bad is this stuff? And prompt injection is as easy as it is, and I'll tell you I'll show you an example in a minute. It's one of those things that's not going to go away in a hurry. So that's why people call it the SQL injection of AI, because it's another one of those ones that you can see it's going to take a long time for developers and implementers to solve for it, because it's got a few interesting angles. I will not walk you through this slide, but I recommend following it. You can see the link there. If you're interested in the different models that come out, and the three trees, the three sort of main branches there, you've got encoder models, encoder, decoder models, and decoder models. And essentially it's showing you all the open source, all the ones that have achieved a certain amount of success, as well as the commercial hosted ones as well. And I think that it's just showing you, I mean, you can just see how the cluster of different models that have come out in the last few years. And that is just accelerating. And if you go to a website like Hugging Face, where you can download these models, and a model is really just the intelligence of the AI. It's they call it the weights and the biases. And if you've got those files and you download them, and you've got the right hardware, you can execute them locally. And I'll talk a bit about remote versus local in a little bit. But I think going through the experience of actually running one of those and seeing what comes out is really interesting. You've got people trying to run them on a Raspberry Pi, and that can generate like one token every 10 seconds. So you sort of see a word appearing every 10 seconds. And then you've got people renting cloud compute with 10 state-of-the-art graphics cards, doing very fast inference. So that's definitely worth tracking, that one. And then, well, what is an AI system? Okay, so you've got the model, weights and biases. That has been developed through training. But what does the system look like? And when we talk about large language models, that's really just one, that's like the brain, if you like. But it's the brain without the skull. It's the brain without the connective tissue. It's the brain without the nerve endings connecting to the rest of the body, being able to move or whatever. So obviously the model security is very important, but as people that are going to be helping, you know, your employer and clients secure AI in real-world deployments, you care about the system, and then you care about, obviously, the broader context within which that system's set. And I referenced Darkbert here because there's a good paper. It's worth reading if you're interested. This one was trained on dark web data. They did a lot of data cleanup, which is kind of interesting, right? You've got all this dark web data. How do you clean dark web data, right? So obviously you can, you know, syntax-wise you can clean some of it, but you want a lot of the badness because of the tasks that you want the model to be able to do, right? And so they ended up with just under 6 gig of dark web data after a lot of deduplication. And I'm showing this for two reasons. One, it's an example of an AI system focused on cybersecurity. But the other one is a picture of a very common workflow that helps us think about where can this be attacked? Where can this be defended? Where can we detect badness? Where can we respond and contain threats? And so one thing just to say on this is that obviously we know bad data in is bad data out. The data filtering, text pre-processing, all of these are attack points. Anyone that's dealt with any DevOps pipelines will know that once you get to a certain size, they're quite complex. There's a lot of moving parts. And even in that kind of controlled environment where you think you know what the inputs are, it can be very hard to defend those pipelines. Well, this is sort of another level, I think, just because it's a lot of unstructured data with unstructured practices and workflows. And what you might have seen in the news is some very big breaches of the training sets. So this was the data that was all prepared by some big companies, well-known firms, and someone leaves the door open to that data. So actually one of the biggest risks with AI is not just the AI, it's mistakes being made around the massive training data and whether that exposes you to intellectual property risk or something worse, right? But definitely recommend reading that paper. What about open source? There's a lot of open source models that have sprung up. They were on that tree slide. What's really interesting, I think, is where basically they squirt an AI or an LLM into your browser. So in other words, if you've got enough desktop compute, laptop compute, you can literally have the weights and biases for that model operating within your web browser, and then it's able to do real-time inference, which is where you tell it, you ask it a question and it gives you an answer. And with Chrome, for example, recently enabling, they've implemented a web GPU API, which they've been testing for some time. That really opens the door to just-in-time AI. So you don't even need the AI model on your machine most of the time. I think the future for professionals is to have a local AI, and I think it will be tuned. You'll train it on the data that you have. And from my experiments so far, the training and sort of deciding how you chunk documents, because you have to break them up at the inference stage. So you have to break them up in order to fit within the constraints of what the AI can receive. There's a lot of naive chunking where they just say, we split the document into 4 pieces because it fits the size of the AI's context window. What I've found is that it's much better if you know your domain, the domain that you're dealing with, you can really emphasize what material you can sort of bias it towards the material which perhaps has views that you feel more strongly that resonate with your experience. So I think there's a lot more work involved in that than just press a button, have it read all your documents, and then it's like this intelligent AI that answers everything. What it will do is generate a lot of junk, and so you have to find ways to bias, as a professional in your particular domain or subdomain, telling it what you care the most about. All right, very brief on this slide. How do you go from this brain to something that can affect change in the world, right? Can do things. And obviously, you've got the pretty famous OODA loop, Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, which I think was from I want to say US Air Force, but I might be wrong. And the main thing, like AI is interesting when you can go and type it and it gives you answers, but at some point you want it to do something useful where you don't have to copy paste the output into a tool that then does something. And so this is where you get this idea of, the AI acting as a input for the task you want, it generates the commands and then it executes them, right? The scary bit. And so this AI in a loop, and there's certain patterns have been published around how do you do this effectively? Because it's very easy for the AI just to generate a load of crap and then execute a load of stuff that doesn't work. And then you're like, well, how do I control this thing? How do I tell it? So then they have it reading the error messages and figuring out, okay, my syntax was wrong. So it automatically figures out the right syntax. Or it asks you a question, like, where can I download the latest syntax? Yeah? And so you give it access to the web, right? Which takes us to sandboxes. Because if we're enabling large language models that can generate text and and other material that we can't predict exactly what it's going to do. How do we obviously control that? And I think the companies that are involved in sandbox technology, this is perfect for them, right? Because they've got all this sandboxing technology that's definitely not perfect, as we know. But that's an area where suddenly that becomes a lot more critical, just to stop runaway AI. Okay, and I don't mean malicious, I just mean making a lot of mistakes and doing bad things as a result. That's ignoring bias. Then lastly, human supervision versus large language model supervision. The future, the one thing I will say is that business leaders will not be able to resist having one AI monitor another AI rather than have a human do it. So in the beginning, there will be humans monitoring what the large language models do, but at some point they will start saying we can split off some of the monitoring tasks and we can say the human only has to do this, so we reduce that, maybe that's a part-time role, and then the other specific LLMs that are quite narrow in their scope will monitor the outputs of the others. So I definitely see that as something. So if that's an area of interest, I definitely encourage you to get into that. And then finally, there's a couple of code repositories that are worth looking at if you want to experiment with an AI that interacts with the internet, that can run commands on your computer, or at least within your container on a computer, or maybe someone else's server will do a container there. Of course, it's quite expensive when you start running AI in a loop, because if you're using a third-party hosted AI, and each time you make a call, you're being charged for the number of tokens that get generated. And so if you have it saying, oh, I tried to run this command, it didn't work, I've got the error message, now I look up what's the correct syntax, and it starts getting in a loop, you can spend your money very fast using something like AutoGPT. So you have been warned. What are the key risks? Honestly, there's a lot. But it's very boring to go through every single risk in a presentation, so I'll just touch on two. Obviously, security and misaligned goals. And talking of alignment, this is the big philosophical question of, do we have a way to establish that we can align the way an AI operates with what we want? And then how do we prove it's aligned? And these are the really big, I think, existential questions that a lot of people are trying to solve. But I definitely think more security people need to get involved, because when I read about AI companies' red teams, yes, they've all got great data science backgrounds, but very few of these people have a hacking background. And so I think there's a big opportunity for you in the audience to start applying to see if you can work on some of these red teams for these models, because I do think that's an area. I used to run a red team, and I can tell you, when I look at the composition of their teams, I'm very surprised. Okay, let's on this one, I just wanted to say this Instruct GPT, if you're interested in digging into the technical aspects of how the hosted companies are trying to align their AIs, this is a standard approach. And there's a mix of machines and humans in the mix, but gradually they're removing the humans. So again, it becomes one AI monitoring another AI, right? What could go wrong? Finally, just to say that, as I mentioned at the beginning, you've got machine learning security, that's a subdomain. AI security, I think, is a bigger domain, and obviously that falls under the broader domain of cybersecurity. Model stealing is maybe the interesting one. I mean, these attacks are all quite interesting, but model stealing, that's where you effectively train one model on a proprietary model, and if they spent millions training that proprietary model, you've got your model, and you just ask this one a lot of questions, and you effectively end up making your model not quite as good, but maybe it's 80% as good as that very expensively trained proprietary model. So maybe you spent $300 training your model on output from the $100 million trained master AI. And that's a real risk. And so for example, OpenAI, they have rate limiting. They have all sorts of controls in place to try and stop you asking too many questions of their AI and asking certain questions framed a certain way, because they don't want you stealing, reverse engineering effectively, all that intelligence that they managed to create. So the other one on here bias in security systems, that's going to be just a big can of worms. If as humans we're struggling a lot today with bias in different spheres of life, particularly in politics and society and culture, well, once it's in the machines, it's going to be an even more tricky topic, I think. Shout out to Daniel Miesler and his AI attack surface map. That's version 1. That's on his danielmiesler.com blog. That's worth a look if you're dealing with any new AI deployments in your organization. And then I'm going to skip through actually to the, okay, if you need to write policy on AI, if you're in a regulated entity and your management is saying, okay, I don't want my people uploading our intellectual property to these public AIs, write me a security policy. Okay, well, that's pretty easy. Don't upload proprietary data. But, how do you go beyond that? Have a look at the AI risk management framework playbook. It's very good. If you're in the policy side of things, you've got 72 different policy aspects to consider, and it provides you text that you can lift and tweak as you need for your organization. Skip that. Okay, let's just quickly hit some sample use cases. These are not here to say, wow, look what I can do with AI. They're here to hopefully whet your appetite to sort of ask, well, what could I do with AI in my work? And so these are just examples, and I'm not saying they're brilliant, but I think they're interesting, and they cover some different areas. Now, this is sort of an odd one. Could you have an AI explain your security controls? Why would you want to do that? Well, a lot of our users sometimes have problems understanding the security controls, either because they're a bit opaque or they just don't have much experience in that area. And so imagine a user interface which, when you select a bad password, a weak password, imagine that behind the scenes it runs this prompt, and the AI then responds with something like this. And I'm rating your password 3 out of 10 because of X, Y, Z. Now, you might say, Craig, you're mental. Why would you give someone's password to a hosted AI? And of course, that's not smart, right? But I think it's not long before we have very capable local AI. And so this is a taste of, being able to help users. Now, you wouldn't give them this long text. You'd make it a lot more UI friendly. But what if you need to explain your controls to regulators or to people that perhaps don't have the technical skill? You can generate a lot of documentation this way. Another example, I was given a presentation to a company in Sweden, and I came across these GPT plugins for Cloudflare Radar and Wolfram Alpha. And this is where you give the hosted AI access to tooling, and OpenAI have built those interfaces, and they host the plugins. And then it's able to literally, like I gave this prompt, plot the distribution of UDP in layer 3-4 attacks in Sweden over the past 7 days. And that was back in May. And it generated this chart. Now, I'm not saying this chart is necessarily useful, or it's going to feed into your cyber intelligence, and suddenly you're going to make a load of decisions on it. But, I gave a one short sentence prompt, and I was able to get this. And I think that's quite interesting in terms of there is certain data mining that I would do as a security guy on a regular basis, where I'm like, wow, it'd be really cool if I could just, give one sentence and it would do that stuff. Instead, we build up a lot of scripts and so forth, and there's nothing wrong with that. But once you start seeing that there's quite a few possibilities with AI, that gets more interesting. Okay, next one is unstructured whois data to structured data. If you've ever done a lot of pen testing or red teaming, you're often looking at whois data, and every whois registrar has a database that doesn't match the format of another registrar's database. So you end up using, thankfully, someone's done the hard work and they've sat down and figured out all the different formats. But there's always one or two that are a bit different, or they change something. And so this is a prompt that you can give GPT-4 to tell it, okay, I've got this, I'm going to give you some whois output, and I want you to format it as a JSON record, and this is the format I want you to follow. So that's the prompt. And then this is an example of the output. So you do a whois threatprompt.com, so that queries the remote whois registrar, and then you feed it to Simon Willison's great tool, command line tool, LLM, which is constantly updating and improving. And you give it the prompt that was on the previous slide, and then it outputs a perfectly formatted JSON record that you can then feed into whatever system it is, or whatever tool, whatever script you're trying to automate. So it's very good for glue, and this is obviously not sensitive data, so using a hosted AI, no problem. Another example, I have a website, threatprompt.com, and I thought, okay, let's think of an example. What could I use AI for to do this website? Okay, what about having there's a lot of words, a lot of terminology in AI that I come across, and I'm like, what does that mean again? So I thought, okay, let's generate a JavaScript AI glossary. And you can, on the website there, the link, you can follow the long-winded transcript of me asking it to generate this. And, you know, within, I can't remember how long it took me, but within an hour or so, I had something which I tried different versions of it. It was generating different code. I was trying it. And I had something that worked reasonably well, right? Now, could I have done that like without the AI? Yes. Would it have taken longer? For sure. It's not a complex task, but still, I would probably have to fix, 20 bugs that I've introduced. Instead, I was fixing bugs that the AI introduced. So that was nice. Anyone that uses Burp Suite? Anyone? Okay. So Burp Suite has, it's a web security scanner, and it has core technology, and then it has extensions that allow you to extend the product, surprise, surprise. And recently they introduced something called bcheck. And bcheck is a scripting language. It's a bit like Python. And instead of having to code up an extension or use someone else's extension that tries to execute Python, you can just write your check in this bcheck language. And the nice thing about it is that the language specification only takes up about half the context window that you can feed to GPT-4 8K, right? So you can basically feed the whole language specification in a prompt along with an instruction. This is what I want you to do. And then it will spit back perfect bcheck code. So this is code it's never seen before, right? So in my case, sometimes I want to find a minimal set of required cookies. If you deal with any complex sites, you get like, 12 cookies, and you're like, I don't want to send 12 cookies every time, especially if I'm sending hundreds of thousands of requests for something in particular. Then I just want to send the smallest amount I can because I'm trying to reduce the size. And so this is a prompt that just shows how you might do that. And then at the bottom, this time I'm using the OpenAI command line tool. And essentially, I'm just saying, okay, generate a script that systematically figures out what cookies I can get rid of. So I only need to send a minimum set. And boom, it generates this, and this works. So a couple of notes. GPT-4 consistently produced pure bcheck code. You could then send that code back to it and have it scrutinize what it generated. So a lot of people, the biggest mistake I see with people using AI, at least for inference, is they take the first answer and they go, oh, that's crap, no good, forget it, right? No, you have to sort of ask it, like you can debate the AI. So you can say, give me the pros and cons of pick a topic, right? And then you can say, now give me the counter arguments for the arguments you just gave me. And so you can do that with code. You can do that with configuration files. You can do that with software architecture that you describe to it. So that's something really valuable. And you can automate all this stuff as well. So for 2 round trips, you're getting something that is certainly better than a weaker model might produce. And on that topic, I was trying to use GPT 3.5 Turbo, because that's like the really cheap model these days. But it just constantly threw in Python function calls. So I'm reading through this going, oh, it really is like Python. No, that's not right. It shouldn't be Python. It should be bcheck. So just to say that, again, this is where you have to check what comes back. And then lastly, and I haven't got time to show this, but I've got a privacy policy evaluator, which basically you paste in your privacy policy, you answer some questions, and then the AI uses a set of prompts that I've written for each question. Okay, what's the question? How do you judge the question? What are some of the edge cases that you need to think about? And it will evaluate your policy and then generate a full report. And it does that in 30 seconds, just to show you it takes longer because of all the inputs. And I don't say this is like rocket science, but really, literally, I just have a JSON file with all my prompts and a web form. and calls to OpenAI. And you can do this for anything. So I did it for somebody in the US who does workplace threat assessments. So any kind of survey or question or something where you have something established and you want to ask a load of questions and then you want to give a verdict. So if you think about in your company where there's probably lots of bureaucracy, and there's probably like really tedious things you have to fill in, and there's probably stupid processes, and you have to do 3 steps instead of 1, that's where I think you're going to see AI get used a lot. So there we go. So that was it. Thanks very much. Please subscribe to the newsletter. I've had a nice summer break from it, but now after this, I'll be issuing the next one this weekend. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.